I was not planning on commenting on this season 1, episode 3 of The Last of Us, except that I've seen a few interesting to me, and I hope will be interesting to you, reviews that were critical. Now, the reason I wasn't going to talk about episode 3 of The Last of Us, HBO's The Last of Us, is because generally everyone seemed to really love it. And I thought that was, a good sign because it was a good episode. But art is very revealing. And that's why I love it so much. And I think it's so interesting. And it's so personal to us. Often when we love something, especially, it's very revealing of our souls. And one of the things I noticed was that although you got a lot of glowing reviews, a lot of people on Twitter, showing to each other how much they were crying because of how sad the story was or whatever. But then you had a few people pushing back, and you had a few articles. And there's an article in the Federalist I'd like to read, at least part of it, to you to kind of explore some of this into it. And part of my interest in this is not just that I saw something that they said that was, what are they opposed to? What's being opposed here in this episode? And I'll kind of give a breakdown. There are going to be spoilers, by the way, but I'll give a breakdown of the episode. But if you haven't seen the episode, then you probably shouldn't watch this whole thing of mine. You should go watch the show. And I recommend it. I recommend The Last of Us. I will say at the start that I do not at all believe in evaluating either good or bad a work of art without the entirety of the work of art. And I do not believe an episode is the work of art. So I'm going to evaluate the episode in a certain sense, but we have to take into consideration the fact that I think there's like 10 episodes and we're only on episode 3. I mean, to me, that's like, so giving a full evaluation of a half or part of a work of art is a terrible thing to do. Terrible. It's the worst thing you could do. It's like you look at one of the toenails of David and you don't like the whole of the David, or you say something good or bad about, no. You got to look at the whole work of art. The whole is the true. You got to look at the whole thing. So we are not going to evaluate the entirety of this work. Even in an episode, I'm only going to make some comments that I can about the artistry that's there and some things, but I'm mostly interested in the reactions that people have had to this episode. Like I said, most of the reactions, the loud ones anyway, the ones when you see on Rolling Stone and CNN and New York Times, all the old traditional news stations are all very loudly and proudly, this is a great episode. And, on Twitter, I think a lot of people are generally, agreeing, but it's the people, the few, and there's a few. And by the way, it was interesting that it was only women, conservative Christian women on the cultural right, that they seem to be the ones that I've heard voicing opinions so far against this episode. Now, I'm the host of The America Show. You can watch that. You can listen to it on anywhere you listen to podcasts. And one of the things I'm interested in is exploring the cultural, historical, and ideological forces that have shaped America today, going all the way back to the founding of America, pre-founding of America, the historical relevance of European history moving into America. So I'm interested in all these things. And I'm currently doing some solo episodes where I'm just gonna be me, not going to interview anybody, talking about some of these early eras, the 1492 to 1776 era, to see like what the parallels are, what the influence that our founding in these early days in America had on us today. And so one of them that is, I think, profound and that we can all see to some degree, even if you don't agree with me, is Puritanism. And I want to read an H.L. Mencken quote that's pretty famous, and you might have heard this, and it's Puritanism, the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. The haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. Now, I've seen this quote attributed to Mencken, but it's also been used around quite a bit. And one of the ways it was used was in the American Mercury, I think in 1925, by a US philosopher. And I'm not exactly sure the context, but the point they were making was that they were making this point about Puritanism hated bear baiting, not because it gave pain to the bear, but because it gave pleasure to the spectators. And then they go on to note that Puritanism is the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. So think about that for a second. So this is something, the Puritans were the major founders of the English colonies in America. They founded Harvard. They brought the first printing press to America. They were the first ones to institute universal education standards in America. And that whole idea of universal literacy is a puritanical idea. So they have a very heavy influence on us to this day. And I think it's very important to think about them and what the legacy they have, the transformations that the religious in America went through that I think are still present today. Okay, so that's a long setup for The Last of Us Episode 3. And again, like I said, there's going to be spoilers. I'm going to get into some spoilers now. But I want to, before I read this review, I want to give you a little bit of context of my review of The Long Time, which is the HBO Max Season 1, Episode 3 of The Last of Us. So this is an episode that I think is very tightly made in the sense that everything is important in this episode. Thematically, plot-wise, stylistically, characterologically. And part of what is, so this is a love story. It's the title, Long Time, is in reference to a song of the same name. And I have heard the song before. I forget the name of the singer, but they play it in it's Linda, and they play it in the show. They play different stanzas throughout the episode. So we start off in this episode. I'm not going to go line by line in this thing, but I want to kind of illustrate how it is well made and how they've put this together really well. So that it starts off with this. Starts off with the character of Joel putting together like a little stone funeral homage to Tess, who just died in the last episode. And she died because she got bit during one of the fights, and then she blows up a whole bunch, which allows Joel and Ellie to move on to the next stage of their journey. And then, we're in this beautiful area west of Boston, 10 miles west of Boston. And we still have this setup between Joel and Ellie, where Ellie, who's this young girl, and she has this, immunity to the fungus out there that's killing everybody or taking over their minds and making them into these zombies. And there's this great scene where she's admiring everything around her because she's never been out of where she lives. She's been hunkered down in this Fedra or this government facility her whole life. Now she's out in the world and she's like, this is really great. I didn't realize there'd be so much bugs in the forest. And they have, a cute exchange. They move on. She's constantly asking him questions. So the whole setup of this story is we have one of loss of a partnership, which was the partnership of Joel and Tess. And then we have this, clingy little girl who clearly needs help. She's very vulnerable. She doesn't know anything about the world that she lives in. She's surprised that there are bugs in the forest, right? She has no idea what to do. She's naked and alone. And, for instance, they go to this, this area that Joel has, this convenience store that Joel has stashed some weapons and some goods that they can use. And they go in there. And we even feel a lot of the fear of this ignorant child who, although we start to see, like I said, it's only episode 3, we start to see that maybe there's more to her than we think, because she drops into this basement without telling him. It's very dark. It's got a scary element, like we can't see what's over here. And you get really tense because you think, oh my gosh, she's going to get attacked or something, there's going to be a jump scare. That never really happens. There's a little sound and we get a little startled, but then it's a forceps thingy, whatever, zombie that has fallen, under these, has been crushed by stones. And so she just basically kills it. But she looks at it very interestingly. But they continue after he finds his goods, and she's so enthralled by a video game. She's like, oh, these are the cool things. Like, everything is new to her. Everything is exciting. She's bringing this, a joy of the world, of the beauty of the world that she hasn't seen. Like, she looks at, oh, there's this crashed airplane, and she said, wow, must have been really cool to be able to fly in the air. And then Joel's like, well, when I was doing it, we didn't really like it because you overpaid for a little seat and you got stuffed in the middle aisle. And she's like, yeah, but you got to be in the air, you got to fly, right? And so, like, she really has this excited view of the world. So we soon, see a pile of dead bodies, and this cuts into, 20 years before, 2003. And then we see this man named Bill, who is a survivalist. He's a man who has been, and even before all of this zombie apocalypse happened, he was a survivalist. He was somebody who had a basement. He was prepared for the end of the world. And in a sense, once everybody leaves and he comes out of his house, he's very happy. He has a smile on his face, and the music cut is very, and he goes out and he starts raiding, not raiding. He just starts taking stuff from all over the place. He turns the lights back on from the plant, and he gets propane and he gets all the gas he needs. He gets all the supplies, and he's just happy. And, he's eaten this great dinner that he cooked. He's very competent. He knows what he's doing. He's smart. He's capable. And, the things that he enjoys at this time is he's eating his great steak or veal or rabbit in front of a TV. And in the TV, he's watching one of these zombies walk into a trap that he made, and it blows its brains out. And he says that never gets old. And then it cuts to 4 years later. Now, 4 years later, it still seems like he's doing okay. But then something happens. A man named Frank falls into one of his traps. I think there's a little bit of symbolism there, but whatever. So he falls into one of his traps. Bill goes out there with his shotgun. He sees him. They come up, and Bill is going to send Frank on his way, but they have this long moment where they look at each other, and Bill sees something in the needing, the desire, and maybe the person, and maybe even we find out later, the attractiveness of this man. He may be attracted to this man. So he brings him in. He helps him get a shower, brings clothes to him. And, he doesn't just give him like a meal and get out of the way. Like, he really, pampers him, and that's Bill. And then he makes a really nice rabbit dinner with vegetables. And, he pairs it with the correct type of wine, which doesn't surprise Frank. He sees him as that type of man who knows that, how to pair a good rabbit with the right kind of wine. And, they kind of look at each other, and they you could tell that they're starting to have some feelings for each other, and they're kind of feeling each other out as well. But then the love sequence happens when Bill or Frank goes to play the piano. He goes through some of the music sheets. He sees E.T.A. Hoffman's Weird Tales opera, and he says, no, that's not you. And that was probably his mother. I think there's a whole backstory you could talk about with that being his mother's, desire. I've read E.T.A. Hoffman. I know that opera, and it's an interesting one. But anyway, so he goes into this. Frank starts playing badly the song Long, Long Time. Then Bill comes in, he plays it, he's closing his eyes. So it's clearly his favorite song. So immediately you get a sense that this is a deep connection between the two men, because they both connected on this song. And, Frank, when he takes out that song at first, and he's the one who chooses it, he said, oh, no, E.T.A. Hoffman, that's not you. Was that your mother's? Or something like that. And then he says, oh, no, this is you. Long, long time. So he starts playing, and then again, Bill starts playing. And then, and Bill is closing his eyes as he's playing. So obviously it is his favorite song. And then there's a connection. Frank asks, like, what did you, who was the woman? He says there was no woman. They kiss, and then they have sex upstairs. And it's, Frank tells him that I'm not a whore. I'm doing this not just for a great lunch, but I'm doing this because, I don't do this just for a great lunch. He's doing this because he actually cares about Bill. And then they end up staying together. And it cuts to 3 years later. They're arguing. It's basically a marital argument. But they have a really great line there, this 3 years later, that I think is really powerful and important to hear in understanding this story. So they say, like, Bill asks, they're having an argument, and Bill is like, who cares what they look like? And Frank says, I do. Our home isn't just our house. It's everything around us. He wants to beautify the world. He wants to beautify everything that they live in to make it better. One of the earlier scenes is Frank puts his finger over some of the dust. Bill doesn't really care about stuff like that. His focus, what he pays attention to, is just the bare necessities for survival. Just breathing in and out, having the food come in and out, making sure you have the right number of supplies, doing accounting, just non-heart, non-soul, non-beauty. He doesn't, non-pleasure. It's just pure, the facts naked, and that's it. So when Frank pleads with him that they need to beautify their home and the whole little town that they now own, Bill says, but why? Just explain to me why. And then Frank has this great line. Paying attention to things, it's how we show love. And he says, this is my street too. Just let me love it the way I want to. And he wants to fix up the wine shop, the furniture shop, the boutique. It cuts to eventually Tess, who we, in the previous episode, which takes place in 2023, she died. But in here we have that, flashback essentially. And she says, it's so great to have a civilized meal in such a beautiful place. When it cuts that later that night, there's a gun battle with some raiders. Bill is shot. We think maybe Bill is going to die, but then it cuts to 10 years later, which is the present time of the story, essentially. And Frank looks like he's dying of cancer, and Bill is fine. So Bill made it, Frank made it, they made it another 10 years. There are paintings everywhere. If you look at shots, see the mise en scène, the what's going on, the world after Frank and before Frank are starkly different. And the way that they're different is the beauty and the wonder and the joy and how he pays attention to the little things. And he's a painter, so he's painting all over the place. There's paintings everywhere now, especially after 20 years together. There's just paintings everywhere. So this is, I think the whole line, paying attention to things, it's how we show love. That's the theme of the episode. Is the paying attention to things. It's about art and beauty and pleasure, bringing that to a survivalist's world. Now, the episode ends, or their story starts to end when Frank decides he wants to die this day. He's in pain. He can no longer paint. That's made very clear. So he's trying to paint, and it cuts to the painting of a painting of Bill, and the eye is messed up because his hand went off because he couldn't control it. So he's just unable to paint anymore. And you could see, if you look carefully, his earlier paintings are obviously finely done, and he's a good painter. He knows what he's doing, but he can't do it anymore. He's in pain. He can't eat good food. When he first enters the house, he eats a wonderful meal. At the end, he's eating like this gross, goopy soup that he doesn't like. And he's sipping like, something that looks yellowish out of a weird, cup. And he's got to eat all these pills, and he seems like he's in pain all the time. He can't move. He can't use his hand. He can't do anything. Right. So he just isn't enjoying life. The beauty of life for Frank is dead. So he's already dead in his view, I think, and the way that character has been established. So he decides to die. He wants to have one perfect day with Bill where they get married. And remember, this is a world where gay marriage had not been legalized because the apocalypse happened in 2003. So there's no gay marriage. So they decided to get to have a wonderful day. They go to the boutique and to get the attire and the right dress for formal occasion. They have their wedding ceremony, just the two of them, and then they have a dinner. And then Frank, and then Bill puts some pills in the wine, and he drinks it. And then Bill drinks the wine, but and Frank realizes that he has poisoned the whole bottle. So they're both going to die. So Bill reveals that there's enough to kill a horse. And he says, this isn't the tragic suicide at the end of the play. I'm old. I'm satisfied. You are my purpose. Now, that I think is all you really need to know, but the story actually goes on. So that's only the story within the story. That's about, probably 80% of this entire episode is their love story. And, so they both go off to die. But it continues, the episode continues with Joel and Ellie coming, and you see the world without Frank and Bill together anymore. So you see the world without them, which is a world that is not, it is rusted over already. Things are starting to break apart. The flowers are the little, gold flowers, the daffodils or the dandelions, whatever, they're dying. Things are starting, dust is everywhere. So dust plays another role here. You see everything is layered in dust. So when Frank was there, or before Frank got there, everything was in dust. When Frank started living there, everything was beautiful. There was no dust. Everything was clean and shiny. Once they both die, again, there's dust everywhere. So again, that's a theme of this whole post-apocalyptic world, that you have, paying attention to the small things, that these types of things they matter. That the way that Bill was living, quote unquote, was that he was not fully alive. He was just a kind of, hold between. He was just surviving for the sake of surviving. And that's not life. That's not a human life. That's not a great existence. And I think that's part of what's happening with Bill's character, by the way, is I think that's the way he was living even before the apocalypse. He was the type of person who was a survivalist. He had a whole shed of guns and, cameras everywhere. He didn't trust his neighbors. And so he didn't trust when anything happened, which, by the way, kept him alive in this apocalypse, sure. But it also meant he wasn't really flourishing, enjoying all the love and beauty and pleasure of the world. So in the letter, he says, I used to hate the world and I was happy when everyone died. But I was wrong because there was one person worth saving. That's what I did. I saved him, then I protected him. That's why men like you and me are here. We have a job to do, and God help any motherfuckers who stand in our way. Now, then it goes on to talk about, so protect the one that you love, protect your person, which was Tess. And of course, the parallel here, and parallels are very common in literature. It's a very effective way to draw out deeper themes in an overarching story. So that's why I said this is episode 3. I don't know what's going to happen for the rest of the episode or the rest of the season, although you're starting to get pretty clear hints about what's going to happen here. But the point here is that, we're now getting a kind of mission, a purpose given to Joel. And we were always wondering if he would take on that purpose or why he would take on that purpose. But the purpose was given deep meaning through this story. And that's why this story is very plot oriented. It's actually really clearly about the deeper motivations of Joel, why he's doing it, because his motivation originally was to get Tess and him to his brother for, helping his brother with something that he needs help with. But now he's getting a deeper meaning for what he's trying to accomplish, which is he tells Ellie, listen, I have 3 rules. You got to do what I say. She listens very intently. She could tell something important is happening. And, he says, first, don't ever mention Tess. Second, don't tell anybody about that bite or the fact that your condition, the fact that you're immune because they'll just kill you. And third, do what I say. And then I love this is a great scene where, or a great thing where he says, now repeat it. And she says, what you say goes. And it's just like, as a, someone who's worked with kids before, she just will not say it the way that he wants her to say it. She will not repeat it. She's going to do it her way. And he has to just accept that or just like walk away. And so he just says, you know what, he accepts it, and they accept each other. And I think it's a great moment. But the point is that the love scene and it is a love scene, the love scene between Bill and Frank is what informs and gives meaning to the new mission that Joel basically has taken on. And he has taken on the mission of protecting Ellie. Now, he has done this de facto up to this point, but now it is through the law, through de jure. It's him. He's doing it now. He's decided. So this is, I think, a very powerful episode. We'll see how it goes. Now, I wanted to get into, now, if you're interested, into this backlash by a few people. And I wanted to start by, so there's this article in the Federalist. I mean, I don't even know if it could be called an article. It's a blog by Kylie Griswold. And she, really she doesn't even dig into it. She doesn't go that far in depth. It's just, it feels like just her feelings about this, but I've seen this a few times already. So I want to cut to the very end of her little blog thing here. And this was pretty popular on Twitter. And I've seen a few like this, a few things that seem to agree with this. And she says, there's a whole section called You Don't Know What Love Is. And she says, if the writers of The Last of Us and the characters they created truly understood love, they might have considered a different road. By sacrificially laying down their own desires instead of selfishly taking their lives, Bill and Frank could have provided friendship to Joel and Ellie, who needed companionship as much as they needed a truck and showers, and literally helped save the world. Instead, they killed that possibility and called it good. Now, nothing to me could be more clear about the atrocity of Christianity, of altruism, of religion, all Abrahamic religions, all religions, that, almost all of them, including all of our deep morality, that many secular people have. Really, this is the naked, actual presentation of that view. Because this is what even people on the left talk about. And, this is the real issue that people truly believe, is that love is about sacrifice. It's about sacrificing yourself, laying down your desires and what makes you happy, what's good for you, and your own thoughts and your own desires. And he says, by sacrificially laying down their own desires instead of selfishly taking their lives. Bill and Frank, what could they have done? Could they have enjoyed their life more? Could they have, she doesn't even put, again, this is the thing I said at the beginning about bear baiting. Like, she's not even interested in, the bears being harmed or bringing pleasure. So she's not even interested in, well, maybe Bill, after Frank died of cancer, could have been friends with Joel and enjoyed Ellie, and they could have had a great time together. And now I've seen other people mention that. I think she maybe makes some allusion to something like that maybe other things, would have been cool if they could have done this. Although I don't think she says, I think it's other people who say that. I mean, all she's saying is that your life doesn't matter to you. Your love doesn't matter to you. The things that you value don't matter. None of the things that you care about matter. You don't matter. It's the fact that Joel and Ellie need friendship because they're lonely and they need a truck and showers. That's why you should stay alive. You need to give them things. You have skills, Bill. You know how to survive. You're a survivalist. You have an obligation to do that, to take care of them, to make sure that they are happier. It doesn't matter if you're happy or miserable or, don't enjoy 1 second of your existence. What matters is that they get something because they need it. Who needed, right? She's very clear here. So she also goes on to really, which I think most people would see as the main motivation behind this author, really decides to go after the homosexuality a little bit. She says that's to say nothing of the dead end their homosexual relationship offers viewers. The same-sex pairing does nothing to further the plot. Not true. Much less the dwindling human race. Okay, that's true. So she's right that gay people can't have kids. Great. One for Kylie. Good for you. But the gratuitous gay plot line, now it's not gratuitous, ubiquitous in today's entertainment landscape. Okay, maybe a little bit ubiquitous in today's entertainment landscape, was unsurprising and hardly the most offensive theme. So she has all these kind of moralistic pieces of words in here talking about how she's offended by this. And what is it that she's really offended by? I think the clear answer is that this is not a Christian match, right? It's a dead end. The homosexual relationship offers a dead end. And throughout this whole piece, and nowhere else that I could see her writing about anything like this, does she seem to indicate all the beauty, all the wonder, all the great times that Bill and Frank had together, that they enjoyed their life together, that they loved each other, that they, that Frank brought purpose to Bill's life, and that Frank was the purpose because he was the beauty. He represented the beauty that Frank or Bill had never in his whole life, even before this apocalypse happened. And it cannot be that the here's one other thing she brings up, and this is the title of her article is the HBO's The Last of Us is wrong. Assisted suicide is not incredibly romantic. And so she has this whole thing about assisted suicide and how that's a bad thing, and Canada's doing it, medical assisted suicide, and that's a slippery slope because then we'll just kill 18-year-olds with no physical ailments willing be able to acquire assisted suicide for mental illness, and we're just gonna have euthanasia, green light for it based on homelessness, poverty, and inability to receive healthcare. Now, look, I've read very little about this. I'm not an expert on what's going on in Canada. I do know that they have the most liberal of all the assisted suicide views. But, what's interesting about a post-apocalyptic world is that you don't have government. So you can kind of take a look at what the essence of this argument is, what the essence of assisted suicide is. This essence of assisted suicide is not this MAID program, the medical assistance in dying program in Canada. It's not the laws for, against it. It's not the laws that hinder it or make it easier. It's not the culture at large pressuring people to do assisted suicide as a kind. That's not what a post-apocalyptic world is like. Post-apocalyptic world has nothing. It's just the two of them. Like, they're not harming anybody. So how on earth is this offensive to her? And that's what's really interesting to contemplate. And the thing that I can see, and she, brings this up, is the whole concept that storytelling has immense power to shape perceptions of the good. And sometimes the most poignant way is to show the darkness of the bad. And she gives an example of, Breaking Bad. But the point that she's making here is what she really is offended by. I think there's a lot of things she's offended by, but I think the thing that she's really offended by here is that this is, I think she consents that this is powerful storytelling, and that in her view, it is romanticizing assisted suicide. Now, that to say that this episode is about assisted suicide, to me, is again revealing something really gross about Kylie's soul. That's what she saw in this whole episode, that the point of the episode was for them to die, for them to have assisted suicide. Because the episode goes through great lengths to show in a very short time. This is not a whole episode, a whole season about Bill and Frank. It's, 34 minutes or whatever. And, in that little time, they draw this life of, a really powerful life that these people had together and the thing that's romanticized, or the thing that sets her off, is when Frank at the end says, this is, I would be furious at you if it wasn't so objectively romantic. If it wasn't so, if it wasn't objectively romantic or incredibly romantic or something like that. And that's what Frank says to Bill, after Bill has, helped both of them die. What he's talking about is not at all what this article and what I've seen other people who are against this talking about. What Frank is talking about is that it's romantic in the sense that you have this survivalist, and where the romance of this whole thing comes from. You have a survivalist, a man who only exists to eat and live and survive. He has no joy in his life, no happiness. He's miserable. He clearly wants to connect with somebody, because the moment somebody, enters into his life, he takes him in without even thinking about it much. And that is what he really wants. He's desperately lonely for connection. That's what the story is about. He finally finds a connection. He writes it in the letter. Joel, you're going to understand this. You have to, I never thought, I hated the world. He says, I hated the world. And he did. That's the whole point of his character, is he hated the world, but then he found one thing to love. And that's what gave his whole life purpose. And that made it, and that's the romance, is that this person who hated the world found love, joy, and beauty. And yes, the show even shows that sometimes there's going to be clashes when that happens, because it's difficult for these people to take that in. So that's the story of Joel, Ellie, Bill, and Frank. I'm interested to see where this show goes. It's looking really good so far. I think it's profound in its exploration. It's trying to play with normal tropes of, this tried and cliched story of a post-apocalyptic zombie apocalypse world. And they're doing a good job. And, we need to be looking at these individuals who are telling us that this is bad, and think about the reasons that they're giving. So the reason Kylie is really objecting to this is because they are laying down their own desires instead of, or because they are not laying down their own desires, that they are being selfish. They're not pretending, or they're not acting out of duty. They're not able to have kids. They're not, which is their duty, as especially in a post-apocalyptic world. Like, no, who cares? Just live your life. You only got one life. They're not supposed to, they're supposed to use Bill's abilities to help Ellie and Joel survive a little bit longer, and to provide them with companionship as well as a truck and like everything is about sacrifice. And that's what is really upset, including living for others' sake. It's not, look, I'm in pain. I can't live any longer. I don't want to, I'm in so much pain every day. I don't want to exist like this. They don't have that right, or even in a post-apocalyptic world, according to Kylie and others like her. So this, I think, is a real indication, a real strain of the kind of Puritanism that has been around in America since before our founding. This is going all the way back to the Massachusetts Bay founding, the types of stories and views and things that they had. I mean, one of the things that I find so interesting in reading these early stories of Puritans in America and Protestants in America is this internal passion that they had about morality, the internal conflict they had about, and they were all writing journals about this. And there's a poet named Anne Bradstreet, and you could read some of her paradox. I'll read the paradox and the confusion she had about the pleasures of the external world and the desire for an afterlife and doing what she thought of as the good. And you have this whole history back and forth for 200, 300, 200 years or maybe 150 years maybe of these people who are trying to do what they think is good. And then you'll have a grand preacher like a Michael Wigglesworth who does the Day of the Doom, where in that book, it's a poem, it's a verse poem sermon. In there, he actually has Jesus chastising infants because, that they were complaining about the fact that they died and couldn't be saved because they believed in predestination. So Jesus chastises them. So there's a deep conflict that Puritans have. I think this is passed down in many of our institutions, even the ones that we think of are super leftist today. But I think there's such large institutions that have holdovers, and this is present all the way to these views of us in the way that we experience The Last of Us. And I think a lot of people probably feel very similar to Kylie in regards to their feelings about The Last of Us. So just real quick, this Anne Bradstreet is from a poem called Contemplations. And she really expresses her struggle between love of the world and desire for eternal life. And I think, again, that's kind of representative of love of the things around you, the flowers in The Last of Us, wiping the dust off to be able to see the windows through the windows clearly. So here's the quote. Then higher on the glistering sun I gazed, whose beams was shaded by the leafy tree. The more I looked, the more I grew amazed, and softly said, what glory's like to you? Soul of this world, this universe's eye. No wonder some made thee a deity. Had I not better known, alas, the same had I. So this is, the universe's eye, and had she known better, she would feel the same way. This is about her contemplation of the universe, about eternity, basically. And she's wondering about then higher on the glistering sun I gaze, when she's looking at the beautiful sun, whose beams were shaded by the leafy tree. The more I looked, the more I grew amazed, and she's amazed by the world around her. And, but yet she wants to contemplate and experience this eternal passion, this eternal world of the afterlife. And again, I think that this is represented and presented in people who are against the pleasures and joys that someone who isn't in what they might think of as a traditional, manner of living would happen, because their view of the good is separated from the worldly life. It's separated from the joys of the world, from the flowers and the birds and the beautiful paintings. They cannot connect those two. And I think Americans, and including Christian Americans even to this day, can definitely enjoy themselves. I think Kylie, I'm sure, can enjoy all kinds of beautiful things herself. But what she can't connect is the good as coming out of that. She sees it as something outside of herself, as outside of the world. That's why it's impossible for her to see the beauty of this love story between Bill, a survivalist who hates the world, including everybody, and Frank, a charismatic man, a charismatic gay man who's also wandering the world alone, trying to find each other, and they finally find each other. And then, of course, they connect over this beautiful song, and it's all told in 34 minutes within a post-apocalyptic world. Okay, so I think there's a lot more to be said there. I could go and analyze this whole episode, minute by minute, because it's really interesting. But I don't know if this whole show is going to be great or not. We'll see. So far, I'm enjoying it, but I will evaluate at the end. Okay. See you next time.